Now that might sound small, but think about it. 1 in 5 Albertans would rather be American than Canadian. Alberta already trades more with the United States than with the rest of Canada's provinces combined. Culturally, Alberta has more in common with Montana and Texas than it does with Quebec or the Maritime provinces.
Albertans are hurt and betrayed. That's how I think Albertans are feeling. I think Canada as a whole got a sense of that feeling of hurt and betrayal with the way the Americans are treating us right now. But we've been treated that way for the last 10 years. Treated like our interests don't matter. Treated like our economic imperatives aren't important. Treated like we should be just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. I think that's what you were seeing in this last election. And I think Albertans want to share my view that we want to be able to have Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. But we also would like to see Team Canada be on Team Alberta for once.
Hello, it's August 2025. Now this video is inspired by current events here in Canada, specifically with this whole so-called Alberta wanting to separate from Canada to either become the 51st state of the United States or their own independent country. Now I did do a video about this topic and the psyop behind it all and everything else, but I thought I would expand on this. And there's been some recent developments more with the psyop than anything else, which I really want to address here in this video, because there's 3 primary points that I want to debunk. Now, before I get into it, I'm just going to kind of recap the other video that I had done on this topic. And there were some questions people had asked. I'm just going to try to remember off the top of my head here real quick some of the questions. Now, for example, one of the questions was asked, well, what do you mean by Alberta being isolated from Canada? And that had to do with geography. And when you look at the 2 major cities in Alberta, you have Calgary as well as Edmonton. And there's really nothing else that they're close to. Take, for example, when you look at Southern Ontario, you have all the cities that are basically overlapping each other. And I explained how this was, in a sense, a good thing, because when you have an isolated city, corruption can run rampant. And I've spent over a decade now exposing the police, judicial, and political corruption in Alberta, as well as parts of the Alberta government anyway. And this ties in with the fact how I mentioned, if Alberta's corruption gets so bad, as long as they're part of Canada, they have recourse, because there's a federal government that can step in and say, hey, what are you guys doing? This is not the descriptive very Canadian, or this is not what we represent as Canada. So I highlighted the issues with regards to Alberta separating or becoming the 51st state, which, if that does happen, Alberta would just simply be exploited. And there's other provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba which would join in, so you'd have basically the middle part of Canada becoming part of the US, and they would just simply get exploited. Now, the psyop part of it, which is really what I kind of focused on in my first video on this topic, was showing how people are being manipulated. And when you look at, for example, how the whole so-called convoy of freedom and everything else, which supposedly, according to what people think, came from the Western provinces. But what we find out, and I've called this out way back when this all began, it was actually the United States, or United States people in politics and military who were behind it all, really pushing it. So this, what's happening now, is part of what began with the events that began in 2020 and ended in 2023. The stage is being set slowly, and a lot of people still to this day have taken the bait. So that's just kind of a summary of that. I recommend going watching that other video, and I go into some more details about it. But what really inspired this video about this so-called separation of Alberta from Canada has to do with a video that I have watched where 3 main points, and you can clearly see this clear as day, how it's all psyoped. They're really emphasizing, really trying to push people and trying to get people all worked up. And I'm going to segue for a moment. There's even now articles how the federal government is trying to take away guns from Albertans. I'm going to stop here just in case there's any question. Alberta is probably, from a freedom standpoint, the best province in all of Canada, hands down. And Albertans are really, truly great people. And if it wasn't for all the nonsense that happened to me and everything I have to deal with, my efforts in Alberta, I'd probably still be there. Not probably, I would be. And it's a beautiful country with the mountains and everything else, but now I digress. Now, these 3 main points that I wanted to debunk. The first point that is really being pushed now is 1 in 5 Albertans want to separate. 1 in 5, and they're really making this a lot. And when you crunch the numbers, like from in percentages and everything else, that's a lot of people. It's still very much the minority, but they're really trying to stretch this out to say, hey, look, we have a lot of people, 1 in 5 of Albertans that want to separate. That's not even close to the majority of people. That there, you can really see how they're grasping for straws, really trying to stir things up and trying to promote, saying, hey, yeah, look at all these other people, come and join the cause to separate. And it's all nonsense, absolute nonsense. Now, the second point that I want to debunk is how Alberta is making claims that they do more business with the United States than the rest of Canada. And they're really pushing that, saying, yeah, see, here's another reason why we should either become the 51st state of the United States or our own independent country, because they do more business with the United States. The reality is, every province does more business with the United States than within Canada. And I don't understand how many people are buying into the nonsense. When you look at Ontario, for example, the United States is the biggest trade partner that Canada has. And remember all that free trade stuff years and years ago and everything else? Yeah, it's all United States. Canada as a whole does more business with the United States than any other country. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that we have the longest border in the world with one country, and the United States is like right there. And United States and Canada, although there are some differences, and have had differences. Really, it's all part of North America. So that whole psyop with, oh, we do more business, it's all nonsense. Just being pushed, really trying to get people, hey, yeah, people, how many people really look into what other provinces are doing with the United States and Canada as a whole? Nobody. They just buy into, oh, this is what they're saying. Because a lot of this information is coming through alternative media, and alternative media long ago had become the new mainstream media. It's just a different flavor of Kool-Aid. Now, the third point that they're really pushing with this psyop is how Alberta more closely resembles Texas and, I don't know, there's a couple other states. Yeah, people have always said that Alberta is Canada's Texas. Makes sense. But here's the thing. Each province in Canada and each state in the United States are different. They have somewhat different ways of, different cultures. There we go. We're going to use the word culture. They have different, slightly different laws and how they do things and everything else. Even accents. You can tell someone from the south to the north and from the east coast to the west coast. I mean, there are differences. So yes, it's reasonable to say that Alberta can relate to a couple of these states, saying, yeah, we're more like them. Again, when you look at, let's just use Ontario for example, Ontario would have more in common with some states in the United States. More with what they would call, the Americans would call blue states, because Ontario is very liberal. And sure, they could, Ontario could say, yeah, we have more in common with them, so we should be part of the United States. I mean, it's nonsense. And Saskatchewan and Manitoba could probably say, yeah, we're more along with Alberta, which would be, Texas or whatever other states that they might think, oh, we're more like them. Yeah, out of 50 states, I'm sure there's a couple that, yeah, you could probably relate to. So this is all just nonsense that's really being pushed. And they're using the Premier of Alberta to be the front person to really pitch this to people. And as I've highlighted in my previous video on this topic, people haven't learned from history. And I use the example of the former Yugoslavia as a whole, how Yugoslavia was all chopped up into the territories, or the whatever you want to call it, became their own little tiny countries, which is more manageable for the United States. And the United States did have a role in that. Just like the United States, from, say, whenever this nonsensical convoy of freedom started, had their hand in that, trying to set the stage to basically chop up Canada. And there are people in the western provinces who are angry at the rest of Canada because other Canadians will be saying you're traitors and everything else. And if there is a problem in Canada, then help make Canada a better country, a better nation, instead of running. And there's Alberta has been complaining for decades about how much they're supporting the rest of Canada, because Alberta, at least used to be, extremely rich, the richest province in Canada because of the oil and gas, and then issues with the federal government and everything else trying to interfere, whatever. A lot of businesses moved to Saskatchewan and BC after the wildfires in northern Alberta that pretty much shut down the oil and gas industry for several years while the fires were going on, whatever. But it's all part of Canada staying together and wanting to pick up and run and, you know, being like little children. And this is not Albertans that I'm talking about here. Albertans, as well as people in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and all of Canada, they're being psyoped by these children, politicians, who are merely doing what they're told to do. They're not really making any decisions. But the US now is coming in to break up Canada into something more manageable, like they've done through other countries. And it's not just, for example, the former Yugoslavia. There's a lot of other countries around the world. And when you look at, for example, there's a guy by the name of John Perkins. He wrote a book called The Economic Hitman, and I've highlighted him in overlays over the years, you know, as it applied to whatever I was talking about in videos. But he was talking about how, and he was a contractor for the US government, how they would go into a country like Iran with $3-4 million, pay people to protest. Wait a second. This sounds very familiar to some of the stuff that people are talking about today. I don't know. This is getting a little bit conspiratorial. Anyway, I'm not going to go off on that direction. But he does talk about how they break up countries and take down leaders and everything else and all the different steps that are involved. This is what's happening in Canada right now. And there's this huge psyop about this. Now, what's the big picture? What's the big end game? Well, time will tell. But it's not the politicians that are, they're just the front people, like Danielle Smith and whoever else is involved in all this. They're following other descriptive orders. But they're pitching this to Canada to break up Canada as a country. 1 in 5, that's still really nothing. And you really have to ask yourself, the 1 of every 5, are they on the, how many are on the fence? How many have made an informed conclusion? Are they just reacting emotionally and getting caught up in all the hype? And doing business with the US, like, you know, so what? And having more in common with Texas and I think it was Minnesota and just maybe one other state. So what? Does it mean just because if they do become the 51st state that, you know, it's going to be, everyone's going to be singing around, singing Kumbaya and butterflies will be going around and everything? No, it's just all nonsense. So I really want to debunk these 3 main points that right now seems to be pushed heavy. Don't buy into it. Just survive life. And breaking away from what is known throughout history to the grass looking green on the other side, that's just a stupid, childish move. And again, this is not a diss against Albertans or even people from Saskatchewan or Manitoba. People are just being fed a psyop, and they're really pushing this agenda. You have to ask yourself, why? Especially why now? Just things to think about. And again, Alberta is a great province. If it wasn't for all the corruption, the heavy, massive corruption out there, I'd still be there. And it is what it is. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
And the answer is Nobody knows. This has never been done in Canada. Well, again, we don't know.
We don't know.
Because we've never had one. What happens then? And the answer is, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Also not practical, because there's a lot of issues that need to be worked out. But it's an interesting hypothetical question.
So no matter what, this news is an artificial program every day to convince you that everything every day is going to make an impact in your life. And it's not. It's not going to matter. If you shut the news off for a month and something major happens, your friends are going to tell you. Your neighbors are going to tell you. You're going to get texts about it. And nothing in your life is going to be really different just because you stopped watching the news. It's the healthiest decision that a lot of people can make right now.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, when is it going to get easier? When you die.